our company works with over 40 retailers. We've been doing it for nearly 20 years, helping them improve their real estate through strategy, operations, execution. And there are really three dominant trends that have been going on pre-COVID that have been impacting especially retail. First of all, we're tremendously overbuilt in terms of retail space per capita. I think in the US, it's something in the order of magnitude of 25 or 35 feet per capita. And Canada's 12 and Germany's 4. So the industry's been struggling with that imbalance between supply and demand for a decade now. Second, the department stores have really collapsed as being a driving force of traffic in shopping center, in regional mall shopping centers. And they've been losing market share now for multiple decades. They've been losing it to specialty stores, to e-commerce, to power centers, to outlet centers. And they really don't have a solution for that. And then third, even though retail sales are growing in total, all of that growth is going to e-commerce. You know, the so-called apocalypse around Amazon. It's really every place in e-commerce, every retailer's increasing their e-commerce sales faster than brick and mortar. So those three things combined have created this tremendous imbalance in the relationship between retail and landlords. 15 years ago, everyone did 10-year deals with 5% annual increases. Today, everyone is doing 1 and 2 year deals. So those are the biggest trends pre-COVID.
I think when you look at our industry, I mean, one of the questions I pose or ask myself from time to time is, you know, we say we're in the specialty store industry, but are there really specialty stores anymore? And, you know, I think one of the biggest challenges we're having in our industry and that we're seeing is, you know, this has been coming for some time. I look at, when you think about and you study the specialty store business of the 1950s, and you think about walking down Main Street and, you know, the love and appreciation that went into the business and the creativity and the empowerment. You know, one of the things that I saw as I worked for larger organizations, I mean, at the time when I was working for May, we had 10 or 12 divisions, so 10 or 12 merchant teams. And we really could do things special for McAllen, Texas versus maybe our store in Denver, Colorado. You know, it was a 5-state brand. And I, as a young kid, you know, I was in my early 20s when I became a merchant, a buyer. I just noticed that our business was becoming more of a bean counter driven mentality. And I hate to say that, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the financial components of our business and the financial executives in our business. But I feel like we've taken some of the creativity and the love and passion. And so I was always, you know, the kid that was pushing the organization to do things differently, whether that was the products we brought in, or whether that was the way we merchandised our stores, or whether that was, you know, not just repeating the last year. I think as an organization and as an industry, we've, you know, got into a lot of last year mentalities. And there's multitudes of reasons for that. But again, if you think about the 1950s, the windows that you would have seen walking down Main Street, the assortments, the diversity in the assortments, the clienteling that went behind that, knowing the customer's name, the guest's name, the investment in the associates. And, you know, I can say this because, I mean, I've worked for the largest company in the world, and I completely understand, you know, with size comes either one or two things are going to happen. Either you have to simplify your business or you have to empower your people. And when I look at our industry today, you know, one of the biggest bifurcations, in my opinion, from the haves and have-nots are the organizations, the companies that are still focused on people, leadership, empowerment, things of that nature, are able to weather these storms.
I think what's really important for a lot of retailers, and what I've noticed, is many retailers are emphasizing the customer growth that they've experienced during the pandemic. And that's really important. It's kind of almost like a digitally native way of thinking. Customer growth is really important. And so if you have had the opportunity to attract a wider audience to your brand during this pandemic, the question now is, how do you keep those customers engaged? How do you turn them from people that have tried your brand to loyalists and continue to keep them in the funnel? So I think that's going to be really important going forward for retailers, is just leveraging the success that they've had during the pandemic, and turning that into long-term win.
I'm Michael Dahl. I'm a partner at A.T. Kearney, and I spend basically all of my time studying consumer and retail trends, what the future looks like, and applying that knowledge predominantly to financial sponsors and large corporate accounts who are trying to understand how their future is going to evolve and what to do. And I look forward to sharing some of the ideas that Robin and I had in the 2 books that we co-authored, The New Rules of Retail and Retail Seismic Shift.
My name is Robin Lewis, and I'm founder and CEO of The Robin Report, which is an unabashed strategic opinion report that takes shots at everybody that's doing it wrong. And hopefully we spread some great knowledge out there. So, you did a lot of work on the supply-demand imbalance, and I think this is a good segue right into that. So do you want to give us a little detail on that?
Sure. The idea is really quite simple, and that is that the supply of material goods is rapidly outpacing the underlying demand for those goods. And the implications of this end up being really quite profound. It means, for all of you who remember basic microeconomics, that when you have supply increasing faster than demand, you get a lot of price pressure. As Robin said, that started to emerge in wave 3 around the consumer power. It's one of the reasons why we've seen the off-price channel grow so dramatically. But it's also changed the way the consumer behaves, the way they interact, what they're looking for, and everything that, quite frankly, I think we talked about as a result of this imbalance and the way it was shifting values has just been dramatically accelerated because of what's happened with the pandemic. Now, let me give a little bit more background, a few more details on it. First of all, in supply, I think all of us would agree that the supply of material goods has increased dramatically. My favorite example, which I've used frequently, is the one of going through the drinks aisle in the supermarket. If you go through the drinks aisle 5 years ago, there was an incredible selection. So I remember, thinking to myself, wow, it's unbelievable selection. I go through now and I'm just so amused because there are drinks that I've never heard of. There's kombucha, all types of brands, all types of flavors. There's Kavita. I'm not exactly sure what Kavita is. There's Bai, there's yerba mate, there's the cold pressed juices. I even laugh because I go to the milk section. There's oat milk, almond milk, soy milk, coconut milk, lactose-free milk, rice milk. And I think you can still get, Robin, regular milk as well. But this is true in every segment. And Robin and I, we were exploring this, were struck by the running category, running shoes. We went back to 1980 and Nike had approximately 2 running shoes. They have over 450 SKUs of running shoes today, and it's been accelerating. It's just been an incredible proliferation of product that's occurred throughout these waves. And it's one of the reasons why producers no longer have so much power, and it's shifted to the point of consumption. So what's happened on the demand side? Well, throughout the post-war era, right up and probably till the early 2000s, demand actually kept up with the supply. You had incredible productivity booms that occurred in this time period, particularly through the 1990s. You had a lot of women entering the workforce, which meant that there was a lot more spending going in material goods as well. You had a credit boom, and all of those have run aground. Plus, there's a few other factors that have been dampening down demand for material goods. One of the big ones has just been the demographic shift. Over the last few years, we've seen the baby boomers aging. And as the baby boomers have aged, they've been consuming less. And you haven't had at the back end here a lot of income growth, real income growth for the younger generations. In fact, a lot of those in that generation are looking at earning less than their parents did. So you've seen a decline on one end without necessarily it being made up on the bottom end. If we look at just income inequality, there's lots of reasons to talk about that. But from a consumption point of view, an economist will tell you the marginal propensity to consume for poor people or poorer is a lot higher than rich people. So you tend to see that there's, again, a dampening down on income growth as well. And the single biggest concept, if you like, that's been driving the decline in demand for material goods is the concept of what we refer to as dematerialization. And essentially that is basically getting at the point that increasingly fewer and fewer dollars in our economy are both being generated and spent on material things versus non-material things.
The question of, is it permanent? Is it temporary? Is it, what's the benefit of omni-channel and where does same day fall in? They're all such layered and textured questions. And I would actually say that omni-channel is not necessarily same day delivery. And the push to same day and fast delivery is something that has just gotten out of hand in retail. It's not necessary. Every consumer survey that we do now and have done over the last 10 years does not suggest that we need fast delivery. And and no customer wants to pay for fast delivery. That's really what it comes down to. If they have to absorb the cost of delivery, they're more than happy to get it, kind of in a more reasonable time frame. The speed issue has become a cost of doing business because there are certain pure play retailers that have basically made it a cost of doing business, and they have very different business models that have allowed that to happen. But what we also know is that if you have unique inventory, you have a unique assortment, you can get that product to consumers when it suits you, because consumers are going to demand that merchandise. I mean, you look at like a brand like Tesla, I mean, people order that thing and wait like a year for their item to arrive. So this concept of instantaneous is artificially constructed by the retail industry that puts these artificial constraints on themselves. I mean, if they had unique product that people demanded, they wouldn't have that pressure. But that is different and separate from this concept of investment in omni-channel. And I completely agree with the idea that, staging inventory in 1,000 different locations and having excess inventory just to get something to a customer within 2 hours makes no sense at all. But some of the most powerful aspects of omni-channel are about visibility across channels. It's about real-time inventory visibility. It's about having more visibility further into the supply chain, so you know where things are when they're arriving consistently. What we hear over and over again that's more important for customers is to know when is a product going to arrive, and give me visibility into that. Show me how far away it is from me and give me a realistic estimate. Is this going to arrive in 3 days or 4 days? And what time of day is it going to come to me? And if you can provide that level of visibility, consumers more often than not are more than happy. It's not about, just pushing something to them within 2 hours. What we are seeing are, kind of essentially a supply and a demand shift in, you have supply, which was in overdrive, which had led to just such low prices altogether. And even, kind of when we look back in time, the single biggest transformation in modern history for the apparel industry was probably manufacturing in China, and the launch of some of these really, really low price mass merchants like Old Navy, and then even the extension into apparel of mass merchants like Walmart and Target that just brought average selling prices down.
The biggest surprise for me has been the way that retailers have pivoted to respond to the increase in digital demand. it's required a massive retooling of their infrastructure to fulfill this buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup, all of these different ways that consumers want to transact, as well as shipping from store, using their stores as distribution centers. It's been a massive amount of change in a very short period of time. So it's impressive. They've also had to retool their stores and their distribution centers to make sure that they're safe for employees and for customers. And that's been a really important change. I'm very impressed with how quickly retail has responded.
Hi, everyone. Simeon Siegel. I'm a managing director and senior retail analyst at BMO Capital Markets. What is really interesting, there's going to be no surprise if I come out and say that pre-COVID, it seems like although we were on a hamster wheel, we were on a hamster wheel with a slight tilt downhill, which unfortunately is a scary looking analogy. So when I think about the transition from pre-COVID to intra-COVID, I would love to say post-COVID, we're obviously not there yet. I think the biggest delta, and what my team and I had started doing a tremendous amount of work on, was this idea that perhaps COVID actually saved retail rather than accelerated its demise, as everyone says. And although that obviously is a headline grabber, and there's plenty of stores and brands that won't make it, unfortunately, what my point was and what the finding was that for the first time, companies don't have to shrink to grow if COVID shrinks for them. So for the first time, management teams were allowed to look at their businesses and figure out what was that point at which the incremental sale became a detrimental sale. What was that point at which consumer saturation had dictated that the next dollar would actually hurt every preceding dollar? And therein led to this idea, when we say shrink to grow, this work for my team, when this notion of shrink to grow, not shrink expenses, it's actually shrink top line. It's the idea of sell less, but charge more. Then you make more. And we've done a lot of nuanced quantitative work around this. We've really analyzed that price elasticity of demand to determine that if you're willing to hold back the units and raise the price, then the reality is the profits flow actually pretty well. And I know that everyone, it's the easiest decision, and I say easy with a lot of air quotes that I didn't actually just make, but let's pretend I did, to close stores, right? Everyone's first reaction is, well, if US is not over commerced, it's over retailed. US is not selling too many things, it has too many stores. I don't know that I buy that. And then I understand, I know this whole, and I'm very familiar with that store per capita table that we look at about the US versus literally every other country, and we're just light years above and too far. I understand that. And the reality is there are plenty of underperforming stores that probably would be better off not being in existence. However, this report that we had done, which was very interesting, and find me on LinkedIn and we can talk about it, but we looked at the opportunities to drive profits from closing stores versus the opportunities to drive profits from selling less. And the argument or the umbrella in this decision tree was, what does it mean to constructively sell less? What does it mean to positively, proactively bring revenues down in the spirit of hoping to elevate and raise profits, bring them up? So we attacked this dual opportunity of, well, I can shrink my base by shrinking my stores, or I can shrink my base by walking away units. In the former, a handful of the companies that we looked at would see a benefit by closing stores. In the latter, only a handful, right? So complete converse, only a handful would not benefit by promoting less. We calculated that in certain instances, a 10 to 25% AUR lift, which I know sounds like a lot in percentage, but if you think about it in terms of sheer dollars, think about it as a ticket. Take a $20 item, bring it up to $25 or $30. The reality is we saw that if you would lose less than a third of your business by raising AUR that much, you actually could see a really nice profit. Does this work? Does shrinking revenues to grow profits actually work? Well, we've had historical precedent, right? We've seen companies like Ralph Lauren, Michael Kors, coach in recent history. We've seen companies earlier on, Tommy Hilfiger, Ray-Ban, other companies a long time ago tried. So we've seen iterations. This goes in and out of cycles. And generally speaking, it serves to, if done well, stabilize margins, but bring businesses down. Well, a stable margin on a smaller revenue base simply means less profits, right? That was a lot of downward motions. That's not a great thing for me to be pushing. And we actually looked at all the store closures from the largest players over the last decade or so. And surprisingly or not, revenues, EBIT, gross profit, pick your metric, is all below the pre-cut level. So we're talking about profit rates and health and et cetera. But at the end of the day, what that argued were that these businesses were simply too big.
What you have with the pandemic is you have, some factories that were taken offline. You have a number of companies actually, because their finances are shakier, have actually cut back on their orders or reduced the amount of inventory that's flowing into their stores, in large part because maybe not all of their entire chain is even open. So you have this, kind of the shift of the supply curve back, but then you also have the shift of the demand curve. And the demand curve is being reduced because you have a decline in overall demand because you have consumers either more financially challenged, unable to afford what they could this time last year, and in some cases, just consumers being scared of shopping or going to stores altogether. And when you have that, what you essentially end up with is just an overall shrinking in quantity and demand, but then you don't necessarily have any deflation in pricing because we may see deflation in pricing if companies, kind of end up having, too much inventory that they can't sell in Q4. But for the most part, you just have, kind of a smaller industry where consumers have to pay more to get the same number of items.
Historically, no one wants to get in front of their entire stakeholder list and say, I'm about to lose revenues per year. That's hard. COVID did it for you. So this notion of shrinking to grow, you actually don't even have to do the shrink. It already happened. There's no company in the world, right? We're in this bizarro scenario where the largest brands in the world and the largest retailers in the world are on level playing field with the startups of the world. And why is that? Because if you have no revenues on the left, and then you're deciding, you're in this 3-month COVID period where everyone has entered this pseudo Chapter 11 status without actually having to do that, without having to file, meaning you don't want to pay vendors, don't pay vendors. You don't want to pay rent, don't pay rent. You're deciding to furlough employees. Like it was this warped scenario where expenses didn't become variable, they became optional. That means no revenues, no expenses. Sounds like a startup. So take a breath. Figure out, right, for the first time in recent retail history, you have to decide how many stores to open, not how many stores to close. That sounds like a curse. It may be a blessing. My team and I did a tremendous amount of work charting where brands peak. Wasn't the goal. We weren't trying to find, there was no hypothesis that brands have a recurring ceiling. But as we were going through this work, what we ended up finding was that all brands, and this is in North America alone, so I'm not, international would add its own dimension, but in North America, we found recurring revenue ceilings when looking at sales at retail. And what that meant to us, very shocking at first, we started to see these consumer saturation points. Ubiquity is not cool. Uniformity is not cool. There's a level at which you hit a certain audience size, and if you try to stretch further, you end up, imagine that rubber band slowly stretching up, you snap back really painfully. And so what we found was at the largest end of the scale, we did this all the way down, at the largest end of the scale, North America DTC only brands peak at $3 billion. If you are willing to outsource your sales distribution, i.e. sell through wholesale, you can get 5 to 6 billion. What happens there though, humans are not hot wired to acknowledge we've peaked, so you try that rubber band stretch. You bedazzle your jeans in a way you didn't do that before. You enter a jewelry category. You find an opportunity to stretch into a new area of athleisure when reality is you're a fashion operator. Whatever it is, what you inevitably realize is the multi-billion dollars that you were being granted permission to sell by your core audience has no desire in bedazzled jeans. And we see that time and again where that ultimately hurts you on the revenue and the margin side. The only company that blows through this is Nike. I can't even include them on the chart. And I've had many conversations with them about this, getting really philosophical, trying to figure out why it is that they blast through this in their own league. We have not come up with an answer. I mean, I firmly believe that in addition to being one of the best, maybe Apple, who knows, but the most successful and prolific seller of products, Nike is also obviously the most successful and prolific seller of stories. They are the best marketer in the world. I don't need to grow forever. I need to grow healthily. And what is really interesting is there was a recent announcement by Ulta saying that they were going to suspend their Canadian expansion. They were going to not grow into Canada. Now, you would say to me, Simeon, you're talking about a growth company not growing. This is not a shrink to grower. And I would say to you, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But by the way, even growth companies should not grow, right? You don't need, hopefully what this is doing, what I thought was so encouraging about that announcement was that you're seeing a growth company say, I'm not going to wait until I'm too big to try to correct my mistakes. I'm actually going to be forward thinking. The best way to say it, and I hadn't really thought about it this way until just this second, is it feels like, and it's sad that it took COVID to do it, it feels like for the first time in a very long time, the investor and management teams are aligned on what they want to happen. The idea of a short-term gain and a long-term gain, they're actually fused right now. Because when you start at zero, there's only one way you want someone to go.
And we genuinely believe there are still the three rules that we laid out in the new rules of retail that have been defining the winners and the losers, both pre-pandemic, but absolutely are defining who's winning post-pandemic and who will continue to win. And just to recap what those three rules are. The first is having almost a neurological connection with your consumer. Secondly is preemptive distribution, being on distribution platforms ahead of and before all of your competitors and all the distribution platforms broadly defined. And the third thing, which we thought was critical as well, and still believe is critical, is having control of the value chain that gives you the ability as a retailer to respond much more rapidly to all of the fluctuations in the market, to use data really effectively, to collect that data, but to have control of the value chain.
Well, plus, Michael, I would add that without that control, they couldn't do either the neurological connection or preemptive distribution, which is very important.
That's a great point,
yeah.
and absolutely true. And recall in our studies, it's always true that those who could respond effectively and rapidly to the consumer were the ones who had the most control over their value chains. One of the reasons why fast fashion did so well for a long time versus the department stores with their long lead times.
Zara particularly, total control.
Yeah.
So Michael, you want to take on neurological connection and tell us a little more detail what that is exactly?
Yeah, for sure. We believe that in order to be successful, you've got to have an incredible connection to your consumer. Nothing totally out of the ordinary there, except a lot of people and a lot of organizations have lost touch to some extent with their consumer. But you have to also have and we called it neurological because you've got to be so top of mind, almost chemically connected to the consumer, that when they're thinking of having an experience, when they're thinking of purchasing a good, when they're thinking of going out, you automatically just pop into their mind in a way that crowds out, quite frankly, a lot of other competitors. And you can see retailers who do this incredibly well, and you can hear consumers who talk about retailers who do it very well. Lululemon and Apple, Robin and I were just chatting beforehand, and he reminded me that they do such a great job because of their co-creation with the consumer around the product itself, whether or not that's Lululemon with the yoga classes, obviously incredible lifestyle that they create, or obviously Apple in all of the ways in which they've expanded the retail format to education, to fun, to experimentation. But you'll hear it for Costco, for Trader Joe's. They have that same type of neurological connection. Some of it's because of the treasure hunt phenomenon that they do. Some of it is because of just the incredible value and ambience that they create. But the pandemic has clearly demonstrated those retailers where the consumer sitting at home has gone searching for and buying. And we're seeing it. Somebody like Nike, again, an incredible connection. The investment that they made in their stores for the experience as well as the product is paying off. And this example and these examples are resonating, I think, with the consumer today. And when we get out of the pandemic, quite frankly, I think they're going to be amplified even further because people are going to look for great experiences and they're going to go to the places which provide it. So,
yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about preemptive distribution, which I think I've often said that this is a distribution century. And from a macro and kind of a simple point of view or definition, we understand the supply and demand imbalance that Michael did such a good job of going through. Brands and retailers have got to figure out how to distribute their value to the consumer first, faster, and more often ahead of the hundreds of other equally compelling competitors. And in this overstored and overstuffed and what we call in the book the share wars marketplace, because that's where they're getting their growth, stealing share. And preemptive distribution also means you've got to be on all possible distribution platforms, online and off, Pinterest, Facebook, all social commerce, mobile apps, LinkedIn, Google search, and offline even, and now we're going to see more of this, and it is going to accelerate among the survivors of the pandemic, small neighborhood store strategies, just like Target is doing today, moving their value across the street from where the consumer lives. It's when you think about it, it is about providing quicker and easier access to consumers for the brand or the retailer, first, faster, and more often, and providing quicker and easier access for consumers, moving their value across the street. So that's the importance of preemptive distribution. I think it's going to accelerate, and one of the reasons it's going to be able to is because of artificial intelligence, machine learning. Target is getting to be at the top of their game with that. They know they'll put a small store next to the Michigan University campus, and it will be assorted with all the things they've learned that those consumers in that area, all those college kids want to buy. So it increases the efficiency, inventory optimization, and most important of all, it's preemptive against all of the other competition. So it's a big deal. And Michael, why don't you take on the value chain?
Yeah, I will. I mean, one thing which I'll just add to, which, when we first laid out preemptive distribution and said you had to be on every distribution platform, it was amazing to me how it's so self-evident right now, but how many people missed and still aren't investing at the right level to be, as you say, optimizing the search function, to be thinking about, a company like Chewy just grew because it was an incredibly data-targeted machine of getting customers in locations they knew that they could fulfill. The large players, by and large, in the pet space just didn't even realize it was taking place, you know, and they just used that, and then used all of the distribution platforms, as well as investing, by the way, in a neurological connection with incredible service, to become an incredibly dominant player now in the pet space. And this to me is just an example of preemptive distribution. Another one today, which you and I were chatting out a little bit, is Kroger with Cluster Truck. I was just thinking again, another variation of preemptive distribution is ways in which you can utilize your space to drive the consumer to you, to be relevant to that consumer. And so having dark kitchens and being sourced, so people, consumers sourcing their food from your locations, as well as the synergies with the fact you can provide the kitchens with the food, is just another really interesting way of thinking about preemptive distribution.
Now, how those get solved post-COVID is everything's accelerated. We think a third of the regional malls have closed in the last 20 years, probably about 300. We think another 300 will close as a result of COVID-19. Macy's has announced a number, 125 closings. I think Nordstrom is closing stores. Penny's is in bankruptcy, closing a third of their stores. Neiman's is closing stores. Lord & Taylor's liquidating. So the anchor stores in those regional malls are just disappearing, and there's no real answer anymore. There's no more Dick's that you can put in a mall, because Dick's is everywhere. There's no more movie theaters going into regional malls. So there's just no replacement, and that's going to cause a tremendous crunch on mall productivity and mall performance. So that's the biggest impact. Pre-COVID and COVID is just accelerating the solution. And I think it's all good for retail, and landlords will end up with more productive space and healthier retail environment.
Who will be the winners and the losers through the end of this year and into 2021? I think that, it goes without say, because this trend has already been so in the works, is that the department stores are going to be challenged. I mean, this is a sector that has been dying since 9/11, and the pandemic has done nothing to help the declines of that sector. So that's a sector that, it not only are its best days, decades in the past, but there's really no hope of resuscitation, I think, long term for that sector, and that has implications for the traffic to malls that are left behind. In terms of who will potentially take those spaces and be the winners, the single biggest transformation that I will say I've seen in retail in the last couple of decades has been the growth of brands. And by that, I mean traditionally wholesale businesses that are now selling direct to consumers. So it's companies like Nike. And those are companies that often are the creators of their product, as well as the distributors, and their ability to choose what gets allocated to where is one that is a playbook that I think others will continue to emulate. The luxury retail sector has, they were probably the first at sort of embracing and really probably creating that playbook. And then companies like Nike and Adidas were fantastic at adapting essentially the luxury playbook to more mass products. And I think that when we think to the future, those aspirational brands will be the ones that kind of have selective distribution, that choose how they're going to distribute their product and how they're going to price that product, and they will be the ones that will be the winners in the future. So that's really where I expect differences and changes. Some of the winners that will emerge even in the next 10 years may be brands that we haven't heard about today because they are just launching now, or they're very under the radar. But I expect that the retail landscape in the next decade is going to be remarkably different than the retail landscape that we see today.
And the final principle that we thought was fundamental then, and we still think it's fundamental now, is how do you have and exert tremendous control over the value chain, and how do you make sure that You are in control of creating the experience for the consumer. How do you make sure that you're in control of the messaging on the different platforms you need to be on? How do you think about maintaining the pipeline, the innovation, the data integrity? One of the critical things, if you think broadly about the value chain today, is actually the data you're collecting and how you're utilizing it. And it's going to be, and is obviously key for companies like Amazon, Walmart and others, really utilizing their data effectively to become much more intimate and effective with the consumer. But that type of control, being able to pinpoint the needs of the consumer, again, have just proven through the pandemic to be extremely powerful.
I mentioned Zara before. That they are probably one of the early examples in retailing of process being more important than product.
Yeah.
I mean, product is table stakes, but getting that product, again, to the consumer first, faster, more often, and you got to be able to control the value chain to do that. And not only get to the consumer first, faster, and more often, meaning fast fashion over and over again, new lines every 2 weeks. But that requires almost total vertical integration, which Zara wasn't totally integrated, but a lot of the production was being done by textile, firms and stuff, but they controlled it.
The future of the retail landscape is absolutely more digital, and it's more integrated. Stores integrated with digital, more multi-channel. Activities like curbside pickup are likely here for good. We've accelerated a number of years in terms of adoption, and I think we're not going back. And so retailers are going to need to figure out how to give consumers assurance that their products and their retail locations and their fulfillment are all safe, and that could be a more permanent change. I think the other thing that's interesting is how this pandemic has impacted leadership. Leaders have had to rise to the occasion. They've had to figure out how to think and act quite quickly and make decisions in a circumstance where there's not a lot of information. And I think that has really built a muscle that will be important for retail going forward. As we think about where retail was heading into this pandemic, a lot of the problems we've known about for a lot of years, right? The overstoring we've known about, and many retailers have been slow to act. Now we've just gone through this event where everything had to happen at lightning speed, and perhaps that's kind of jolted the retail industry into action a bit, and maybe that's a good thing.
Thanks for watching, and join us for the next episode, Supply Chain Interrupted.